Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the anatomy of a sporting tragedy. We're going to explore how a single football match back in 1950 evolved into a profound cultural trauma. And honestly, it plays out like a gripping psychological thriller. We've got unchecked hubris, brilliant tactical mind games, and a ghost that haunted a nation for over 6 decades. We're kicking things off with this legendary quote from Uruguayan winger Alcides Giglia. He said, "Only 3 people have silenced the Maracana, the Pope, Frank Sinatra, and me." It just pulls you right into the mythos of a moment that left an entire nation totally paralyzed. Picture it, 200,000 screaming, celebratory fans packed into the largest concrete arena ever built, and then suddenly struck completely, morbidly silent. It's an almost unimaginable shift in human emotion. To really get how it happened, we've got to look at the setup. Which brings us to our first part. Section 1. The premature coronation. So, heading into this final match, the Brazilian host nation was riding on sheer, unchecked hubris. They viewed winning this World Cup on home soil as their absolute, undeniable destiny. I mean, on the very morning of the deciding match, the Brazilian newspaper O Mundo actually printed a photo of the team with a headline crowning them champions, before a single whistle even blew. You had politicians giving victory speeches, a celebratory samba song was already recorded and pressed, and the whole country was literally in full carnival mode. And, you can almost understand that absolute confidence when you compare the two teams' paths. In the final group stage, Brazil had utterly dismantled their European opponents. We're talking thrashing Sweden 7-1 and Spain 6-1. Plus, because of the tournament's quirky round-robin format back then, Brazil only needed a draw to lift the cup. Uruguay? Well, they were these scrappy underdogs who barely scraped into the final match. They drew with Spain and needed a late comeback against Sweden. To the rest of the world, they were basically just sacrificial lambs for Brazil's big party. All right, let's move on to Section 2, the Black Chiefs' mind games. While everyone else saw a Uruguayan team being led to the slaughter, their imposing captain Obdulio Varela, known as the Black Chief, well, he saw an opportunity. He orchestrated an absolute psychological masterclass against the overconfident hosts, mapping out his disruption in 3 masterful steps. First, when the Uruguayan consul brought those arrogant O Mundo newspapers into the team hotel, basically offering early commiserations, Varela took them, laid them out in the urinals, and told his team to literally relieve themselves on the premature headlines. Step 2, during the match, he specifically targeted Brazil's defender, Bigode. After a foul, Varela just marched right up and gave him a sharp smack around the ear, just to assert dominance and rattle the Brazilian defense. And step 3, well, we'll get to his ultimate stalling tactic in just a second. Because before they even stepped onto the grass, Varela knew the biggest threat wasn't just the 11 guys in yellow. It was that terrifying carnival of 200,000 screaming fans. So, in the tunnel, he issued a strict command to shield his team from the overwhelming spectacle above. He told them, "Go out calmly, do not look up. The match is played below." He forced them to keep their eyes strictly on the pitch, completely neutralizing the stadium's intimidation factor. Okay, Section 3, silencing the Maracana. This is where Varela's psychological warfare really played out under immense, totally unprecedented pressure. Right after halftime, in the 47th minute, Brazil's Friaça finally scores. The stadium absolutely erupts. It seems like the inevitable is happening, right? But here is where Varela deploys step 3. He calmly picks the ball out of the net, tucks it right under his arm, and walks incredibly slowly to the referee to argue a completely fake offside call. He even demands that an English translator be brought onto the pitch to argue with the referee. Now, he knew the goal was perfectly valid, but he purposefully dragged this charade out for so long that the boiling 200,000-person frenzy slowly cooled into this confused, frustrated silence. He single-handedly drained the stadium's momentum. Once play finally resumed, Uruguay was settled. Xafiano equalized in the 66th minute, and then came the fatal blow, Gigia's game winner in the 79th. The stadium flatlined. Jules Rimet, the FIFA chief who is actually supposed to give a pre-written speech praising Brazil, stepped onto the pitch and noted how the silence was morbid, sometimes too difficult to bear. He perfectly captured that chilling juxtaposition of the pre-game roar against the deathly, frozen silence that consumed 200,000 spectators at the final whistle. Rimet ended up just finding Varela in the chaos and handing him the cup in secret. Let's look at the fallout in Section 4, the tragic scapegoats. See, this wasn't just a lost football match. It was a massive cultural shockwave. The famous Brazilian playwright Nelson Rodrigues actually described it as Brazil's Hiroshima, a true national catastrophe. The trauma was so severe that Brazil permanently discarded their uniforms. They used to wear white jerseys with a blue collar, but after 1950, they believed those colors were forever cursed. So they launched a national competition to design a new kit, and it was actually won by a 19-year-old illustrator. He created the iconic yellow, green, and blue kit that we instantly associate with Brazil today. I mean, think about that. The trauma literally rewrote their national identity. But while the team got a flashy new shirt, no one bore the weight of this trauma more than Moacir Barbosa. He was the Brazilian goalkeeper who got beaten at his near post by Guigia's winning shot. He became the nation's eternal scapegoat for 44 long years. Barbosa served this tragic, lifelong exile from his own country's affection. Everywhere he went, people pointed him out as the man who made Brazil weep. He once heartbreakingly said, "In Brazil, the maximum penalty for a crime is 30 years. I've spent 44 years paying for a crime I didn't even commit." In 1994, literally 44 years after the match, he tried to visit the Brazilian national team's training camp and was actively turned away by officials. Why? Because they feared he was still a jinx. He died carrying the unearned ingratitude of millions. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, a modern ghost. So, for 64 years, the Maracanazo was the undisputed darkest day in Brazilian sports history. That is, until 2014. And this brings up a really fascinating question of narrative scaling that fans and analysts still debate today. Was the heartbreak of 1950 worse than the Mineirazo? That was the crushing 7-1 loss to Germany in the 2014 World Cup semifinal, which was also held on Brazilian soil. When you compare these two matches, you really get two completely different types of pain. 1950 was your peak narrative tragedy, right? A beautifully tense 2-1 thriller lost in the final 11 minutes by an underdog's sheer heroic willpower. But 2014 was a sheer mathematically impossible embarrassment. 7-1. And it happened in the shadow of severe socio-political protests across Brazil over government spending on the tournament. The team's absolute idol, Neymar, was injured. And just to rub salt in the wound, Germany's Miroslav Klose scored to break the all-time World Cup scoring record, a record previously held by Brazil's own Ronaldo. There was zero poetry in 2014. It was just brutal, unrelenting humiliation. So ultimately, as you think about these two devastating moments in sports history, you have to ask yourself, which form of defeat actually leaves a deeper scar on the human psyche? Is it the poetic tragedy of 1950, where you are so close to destiny you can almost touch it, only to have it snatched away in the dying moments? Or is it the 2014 blowout, a public humiliation so profound it completely shatters the illusion that you ever belonged on the pitch in the first place? It's a fascinating look into the psychology of defeat. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.